Oh, yeah. You like the microphone?
I can go for it.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to today's meeting. I'll be handing the mic over real soon, but I just wanted to say, for anyone who asks questions today for today's workshop, there are some really good, cool stickers. You can pick from them, so the earlier you ask questions, you get to pick. Yeah, that's about what I was going to say. I can hand the mic over.
Sure. Thanks. I didn't want to be talking the whole time. So questions highly encouraged at any point as I go through my slides today. But yeah, thanks for coming. Today we're going to talk about designing for usability. My name is Rebecca Blakiston. I use she, her pronouns. I am fully vaccinated, and this is my first time speaking in front of live human beings since February of last year. So that'll be interesting. So I appreciate you all being here. And hopefully this will be useful for you. I know you're starting to work on a website project. And so I'm going to talk about some kind of really broad general usability and user experience principles, but then also highly encourage you if you're thinking about what to do with your own website that you ask those questions and we can make sure we get to that. So it's most useful for you. Now let's see if my technology will let me go to the next slide. There we go. So first I wanted to talk about UX. Does everyone know what UX stands for? You get a sticker if you yell it out.
User experience.
All right, sticker in the first row, user experience. What's really funny, I've been doing this work for 10, 15 years. My dad still doesn't understand why it's not UE. He's like, why is it called UX? Anyway, it's called UX. It's been called that for a long time. User experience. You may have heard of UX UI design. That's often something that you'll see in job descriptions. And I can dive into that if you're curious about different job titles and what they all mean, but user experience. So what is UX? There's a lot of different definitions if you Google this. One that I've kind of landed on is really focusing on this cross-disciplinary field. So there is not one major, there's not one college, there's not one background that makes you good at UX because it is so cross-disciplinary. So it combines research. Research is a really big part of UX, understanding people and how people think and how they act, how they behave, how they make decisions. There's content. So there's actually a really big sort of English and journalism and communications piece to UX, because if you think about why people go to a website or use an app, a lot of times they want the content, they want the questions answered. So that content's a really big piece. And the goal being to design and create better experiences for people. So in short, UXers, sometimes I'll talk about UXers because that includes UX designers, UX researchers, UX UI designers, content strategists, content specialists. UXers broadly are problem solvers, human-centered problem solvers. Does that make sense? Okay. If you like Venn diagrams, this is a Venn diagram that might also help. So I mentioned research, design, and content. UX really combines all of those. So I work in a UX team and we have people focused in on the research part, people focused on the content part, and people focused on the design aspect. And then you'll also sometimes have a UX team of one. There's a really good book called The UX Team of One that combines all those things. So this is the UX team at the library. And I realize you can't see everything because my little video is there, but it says UA Libraries behind there. So I call us a small yet mighty team because there's really just 3 full-time people. Myself as a UX strategist, we have a full-time UX designer, and we're currently hiring for a content strategist. We also have a lot of student assistants. So this is a photo of us I think it was in June. So it was soon after we were all fully vaccinated. We did what we called an on-site retreat because we'd been working remotely for so long. So we came together, we had some snacks, we got to know each other a little bit in person, but we have student assistants from a variety of backgrounds. So we do have also interns. I'm focusing on data science, information science, computer science, but also business and English. So people have come from a lot of different backgrounds to work within our team. And the types of things that we do in the UX team, a lot of the research side, so I mentioned that includes things like user interviews, observations of what people are doing, whether it's on a website or in the physical space in the library. Usability testing, we do a ton of that. Looking at web analytics, so looking at the behavior tracking, what people are doing on our websites, the content writing and editing, which I've mentioned, prototyping, so putting visual ideas down into either low fidelity or high fidelity prototype and then testing it with people. I'm collaborating with developers. So we do have a separate web development team. And when we're here in person, we're really closely working with them. We're adjacent to them in the office upstairs, but they are managed in a different unit. So sometimes you'll see design teams and dev teams working together. And that's kind of how we do it. And also training and consulting. So we do a lot of that work as well. Has anyone seen a tiny cafe before? So we did this every week in the library lobby up until March of 2020. We might bring it back soon, but it's basically a really lightweight way to get feedback from users. So we would do usability testing. This is in front of the Health Sciences Library. And we were testing the hours on the website. And so that was a way to just get really quick feedback from people and give them snacks and coffee. That was the incentive. And any questions about UX kind of as a job, as a profession? Yes. It's both. So that's one of the big differences when you look at Bob, who's our designer, had a really good visual of visual design, UI design, and UX design. UX design usually does end-to-end experience, which includes the physical and the digital channels. So for us, like a really good example of that is checking out a book in the library. So first you start on the website, perhaps, maybe you go to the catalog, maybe you make a request, that's all through the digital interface. Then you have to physically come to the building, navigate to find the book, check out the book on a machine, and maybe interact with a human, and then you leave. That whole process is all part of the user experience. So usually that is a broader picture of that end-to-end experience, sometimes called. Yeah.
How do you gain experience in UX until you're not?
Right. That's a good question. Work with my team is one idea. But we do, one of the things, there are more internships kind of popping up in different places. So there's some places on campus like Tech Core, they do UX UI testing and they work within the business college. There are some classes that you can take. So strangely enough, English 430 is a user experience research class. It's in the English department, but anyone can take it. There are internship opportunities out in industry. And I'll talk a little bit later about UX at UA, and there's a growing community in Tucson to kind of make those connections. But what's interesting about UX though, a lot of the methods you can apply no matter what your job is. So if you're working in a job where you get to make decisions on a website, you can incorporate UX testing into that. So one of the things I did before I did it sort of professionally was just build it into like constantly improving the experience for people using your services, your spaces. So that's another way to do it too. Yeah. Anyone else want a sticker? Okay. Usability. So the way I decided to break this down, we could do a whole semester class on usability for websites, but I thought let's really focus in on these four kind of big overarching principles. The first one being do your research. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. Use design conventions, which essentially means the things that people are already familiar with. Don't try to break those patterns or people can get lost and confused. So really focus in on those conventions that people are familiar with. Make it easy. One of the stickers actually says make it easy. That's also a principle. And then test early and often, which relates back to the research, but really once you have a thing that's ready to share with someone, get that feedback and then iterate and make it better. So let's talk about doing your research. One of the big things, even if you've been a designer and you're like really good at that for years, you always want to test what you're creating. People will surprise you. I've done usability testing for 10, 20 years, like pushing 20 years, and I'm still surprised by what people do. So really questioning your assumptions, being humble, and being open to things not working the way that you think that they should. And investing that time in understanding your users. And so 3 of the big things to look for and try to understand is users' goals. So what are they trying to do? And this could be a good thing to think about with your website. Like what is the fact that you are all here today, you probably have some kind of professional or personal goal, academic goal, which is why you're connected with this community. So think about what are those goals that people are trying to reach. And that'll help you decide, what's the content and the primary things people might try to do on your website. And then their behavior, so how do they go about doing it? This is where you get into things like testing and observing real people using your products and your services. And then there are constraints. So what is it that's getting in their way of achieving their goals? That can be really helpful too. You also want to build empathy. So we talk about, in UX, we talk about pathological empathy, which means always trying to put yourself in the shoes of the other person. Some of the ways to do this, user interviews are really helpful. This is just a one-on-one conversation when you listen to the person who's using your website or using your product in some way, and uncovering what are their values, what's driving them, what are their motivations, their challenges, and always keeping that in mind as you're designing a solution for them. Observations, so you could be observing someone using a website, you could be observing someone using a physical space, and noticing what they're doing and really paying attention and being curious about that. Even things like the language that they're using, because that might be a keyword that they're searching. So kind of thinking about what are those terms, keywords that people are using, and how do they go about making decisions. And then immersion. So this is a really simple practice of just taking the time to experience what others are experiencing. An example of this that we do in the library is rather than using a meeting room for a work meeting, we'll go and use a study room. So we have a better sense of like, what is it like to use a study room in the library? Does that make sense? Has anyone done any of these things? Okay, they're really easy to do too. They're very simple to kind of build into your practice. So one of the first things that you're setting out, and it sounds like with your website, you're sort of starting from scratch, which is great in a lot of ways. You have a lot of opportunity. So one of the first things you'll think about is defining your audience. Who are the people that this website's serving, that this website's helpful for? What are their goals? So we talked a little about that. It could be personal goals, professional goals, academic goals, really what motivates them to be there in the first place. And then what are their behaviors? So what do they do on your website? Or other websites. So they might not necessarily end up, this can be helpful in where you place sort of marketing and promotion so that people can find you. A lot of people aren't going to search for UX at UA because they don't know it exists, but they might search UX UI, they might search user experience Arizona, Tucson. What are the types of things that they might search? And what are they doing? And how are they discovering you? And also thinking about the top questions and tasks. So this is something I always think about when we start a new project, we're designing something new. Those top questions and tasks are really important. Do you have a sense of what those are for your users, for your website? Like, what are the main questions they might have? They end up on your site. Okay, yeah. When you meet, yeah. Yeah. So that's a helpful thing to just even write down and see if you're on the same page about that, because you might have very different ideas about why people are there as well. And really then identifying what is critical. So these are just a few examples of what they might look like, but I tend to break them up into tasks and questions. So a task is where you're actually sort of doing a function, you're completing something, you're submitting a form, maybe you're making a phone call, you're RSVPing for something, you're contacting someone. So what are those things they're actually doing, like task-based things? And then what are the questions that they need answered, which is more about content, like what's the content that they're looking for to answer their questions. So here examples could be, what are the membership dues? Are there membership dues? How do I get involved? When is your next event? And if you have those established, that's really informative then when you do usability testing, because you can observe someone and say, okay, here's our website, find out when our next event is and see how well they do or don't do it, finding that information. So one of the tools that we've used a lot is called personas. Has anyone heard of personas? The tool? Yeah, one person, cool. Do you want to share what you think they are?
User persona
Is that Kat?
yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
You know what persona, you made this persona, no? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a person that is like kind of an ideal person for a specific situation. That you come up with different parts that they would find most important and tailor your website to fit
Nice, thank you. That's so funny that you're here, and I'm glad I asked because I wouldn't have even seen you in the back. Yeah, and you can see that the way we break these down is what we talked about, so the goals, the behaviors, and the constraints. And ideally, these are based on research, so it's not completely based on your own assumptions. It's based on talking to real people, looking at the data, and using that to build the persona. And sometimes you'll have multiple personas, so you'll have, in this case, this is the UX curious student. So this is someone perhaps that would be here today, someone who's maybe heard of UX, knows a little bit about it. We have other personas for the professional UXer who's in industry in Tucson. And their behaviors and goals are very different. And we want to make sure we appeal to and reflect the needs of the different audiences. So it's helpful to have 3, sometimes even 5 personas, depending on the complexity of what you're looking at. Pat got a sticker right, okay, good. I should also mention, and I'll mention at the end, but we have something called the UX Cookbook, which is the uxcookbook.com. That has a lot of templates. It has recipes of different UX methods, and we do have a personas recipe that has that template that you just saw if you wanted to use that as a tool. So that, what was that first section? Do your research. Any questions on doing your research? Understanding your users? One thing that's a little bit interesting about this group, because one of the other UX mantras is you are not your user. In this case, you kind of are your user a little bit because you're also the community that maybe found this website and found this information. So you sort of have that advantage where you can interview each other. Like you could have a workshop where you just get together in pairs and talk about, what brought you to this group? What's the value this is bringing to you? What are questions that you still have? Those types of things to really understand. We did that for the UX at UA group early on when we built our first version of the website, and we had people create their own personas. It was like a create your own, like you are a persona and fill these things out. What are your goals? What are your constraints? And we learned things like people that were outside of Tucson, like we wanted to make sure we had virtual access to our events, things like that. So now I'm going to go through some design conventions. So this is another kind of principle for usability. You don't want to reinvent the wheel in a lot of ways, and it can be very tempting, especially when you're starting from scratch, to try and get sort of flashy and creative and innovative. And it's good to do that, and also to remember that there are conventions that are going to make things much easier for people to use your site. So here's an example of how something went wrong. This is Bucknell University, and they hired out a redesign of their website and created a really gorgeous, like aesthetically gorgeous site. It was minimalist navigation. It was this glossy design. They were so proud of it. Like, everyone's going to love this. It's just this beautiful website. It was so frustrating when people try to use it. They put it in front of some students and realized they had to hunt for everything. So your basic information like tuition costs, majors was really hard to find, even though it looked beautiful. So just avoid that. Just be really careful about that, and don't let the form over the function. Wait, yes, that's it. Don't let the design the visual design overtake what people are trying to do on the site. That makes sense. We've all been on websites that frustrate us, right? You're like, okay, enough. I want to get the content. I want the answer to my question. So a convention, putting things where they usually go. Just some very basic things. Your search box is usually in the top right. Actual search boxes do much better than just the search icon. Just a little detail. Logos in the top left that take you back to the home page. Contact information and social links in the footer. So kind of where do people usually look for this type of information, and just make sure you follow those conventions. Super simple stuff, but often overlooked. Another simple thing, don't underline text. It looks like a link. Does anyone recognize this screenshot? What's that?
Is that iPhone notes?
No, it's U of A related. Parking and transportation.
Oh.
Has anyone used the parking and transportation website?
No.
Has anyone enjoyed and found a great success in their trying to use the parking and transportation website? They don't have a UX team. So just a very simple example, they just underlined their headings so they look like links because they're underlined. Just don't underline. On the other side of things, this is also a U of A example. This is from the HR system. You can't tell that these are links. This whole list of bullets is links, but you can't tell by looking at it, right? You want to make sure whenever you design your links, it's very clear that they are links so that you don't make other things look like links if they're not, especially thinking of people using touch screens. they don't even get that hover over effect. So imagine hover over doesn't exist, right? Like, can you tell visually by looking at it that's a link? Also, don't rely on color alone. So I've seen this a lot of times where you just make it red or you just make it blue. Anyone who's colorblind, that's not going to help them find a link. So it needs to also be bold or also be underlined. Does that make sense? Okay. So keeping it focused, I think we've all experienced this as well, where you go to a homepage and clearly they're trying to compete with each other for the real estate that is the homepage. So suddenly all the messages get lost because you're trying to do too much. If you try to prioritize everything, you have prioritized nothing. Just putting something on the homepage also doesn't make it findable necessarily if it's amongst a bunch of other things. I don't know what this website is. It was a real website I had to go to and I was so sad. Here's another, I don't want to pick on parking and transportation, but here we are. Anytime I see these, I just take screenshots, and I was on there recently. So trying to, love white space, allowing your content to breathe, making it easy to skim, really incorporating relevant images and avoiding those walls of text. So if you are having heavier content pages, breaking it up, making short paragraphs, making it easier on the eyes. When you see something like this, it's overwhelming. And most people are not going to read something like this word for word. They just won't. There's also some blue and red text. I don't know what's going on there. Oh, it says click button below. What button? That's also a bad sign if they have to give you instructions on what to click, because that probably means you can't tell that it's clickable. I've seen that a lot. Anything about design conventions, questions, thoughts on that? Yes, yeah. Yeah. There's a great, and it's kind of a classic book now, but all of the elements of it still hold true. Don't Make Me Think. The subtitle is like the Handbook of Web Usability. It's a really easy, quick read. I think we have the ebook in the library. It's by Steve Krug. And that's one of the things that almost all of our new student employees read as like a foundational thing. So he has like one example of one of his principles is instructions must die. So if you're like filling out a web form and there's 2 paragraphs of instructions on how to fill the web form out, that's probably unnecessary. Like anytime you see instructions, question that. Also, we'll see sometimes instructions on how to use the website. If the website's well designed, you don't need instructions on how to use the website. So those types of things. But yeah, that's a good one. At the end of the presentation, I talk more about resources and UX and UA and stuff, but that's the one that for me was like, ooh, it sticks with you, Yeah. Nielsen Norman Group is also really good. They have lots of short, like 3-minute videos and really well-researched articles. Like they have a really good article that came out recently on opening tabs in new windows or not. And it's a very well-researched, like all the pros and cons and when you do and when you don't. So Nielsen Norman Group. If you have especially if you have a specific issue and you're like, I want to know the research that people have done on this, that's my go-to. Yeah. They're also the ones that gave me the stickers, so they haven't hired me yet, but okay. So making it easy. Oh, don't make people think. That's funny. That's the name of the book, is Don't Make Me Think. But yeah, keeping things simple, succinct, and intuitive. So one of the main things I've mentioned content before, really using plain language as much as possible in your content, using active voice. So that means it's very clear what the subjects of the sentence is. Not passive voice, which tends to be more academic sounding, more formal, being direct, treating it like a conversation. So calling the user you, calling your organization us or we, and really being that kind of conversational tone. And removing the unnecessary. So keeping your sentences short, your paragraphs short. It's okay to have a paragraph that's just one sentence on the web. Fragments are also okay. And avoiding jargon, so not trying to overcomplicate things, and not assuming that everyone knows what you mean if you're using jargon. Designing clear navigation. So you want to have well-structured content. Meaningful link labels is another really important thing. You don't need click here. And if you only have click here, and you don't have the context around what they're clicking on, it becomes much less accessible, especially for people using screen readers. So low vision and blind users are going to be using screen readers to tab through the links. If they just see click here, they don't know where that takes them. Make it meaningful so it's really clear when you click on the link what it's going to go to. Is there anything else with that? Making your content accessible. So this is often an error I see in people who haven't built a lot of websites before, is trying to make their own headings just by making it bold or larger font. That doesn't make it clear to screen readers that it's an actual heading, and screen readers use tabbing to go through headings and find them and navigate the site. So really make sure you're using those semantic headings. So your H1s, your H2s, your H3s. And also allowing for skimming. So using meaningful headings. So most people are not going to read your page word for word. So just having an easy way for them to go through and find the content that they're looking for. Avoiding PDFs. Higher ed loves PDFs across our websites. They're especially hard if you're on your phone and you just want information, you have to download a massive PDF. They're less skimmable, they're less accessible. Try to put it just on the web page whenever you can. Using alternative text for images. So this is also important for people who can't visually see the screen. It'll describe the image for them. Especially important if you have words in that. So sometimes you'll see this like an event flyer, it has the words and it's an image. Just make sure those words are reflected in the alt text. And again, using meaningful link labels. Does that all make sense? Okay. Making it device agnostic. So making sure you test it on all different devices. Your large monitors like these, also your small phones, landscape portrait mode, making sure it works on all devices, no matter what. And don't hide content to people who are on their phones. Sometimes people will hide content and that's not nice. Okay. Anything on that? Questions? I don't remember what that section was. Making it easy. Okay. So testing early and often, and this is also just a common UX practice, is not to wait until the very, very end when you think you have a final design and then putting it in front of people, because you could have made a mistake a month earlier that if you had fixed it, you'd be in a much better place by the end of the project. So starting out, even with your basic, what's called concept or impression testing, Kat and I wrote a recipe in the UX cookbook on impression testing. So check that out. And basically it's putting something in front of people and getting their initial reactions. How does it make them feel? Does it look useful to them? Doing that early on, even with just a paper prototype, can be really informative. And then getting feedback at every stage and just iterating and iterating based on the feedback. Does that sound doable? Does that sound hard? What's nice is you have a captive audience. You can just test on each other. Any kind of feedback. Has anyone had experience prototyping? A couple people. Okay, cool. So prototyping essentially is bringing your ideas to life with some kind of visual representation. And this is something that doesn't always have to be prototyping in a digital space. So the example I have here is when we were prototyping a feedback kind of kiosk at the library, where we had a little table and we just had these little pieces of paper just to demonstrate what it would look like if we did something like you see in airports, you know, with the little happy faces and sad faces. So just bringing your idea to life and getting feedback on it early on. This is a good example of an app that was being designed that they did a low fidelity prototype. This was a designer who used to work with me. And so what she essentially did is she just had a little piece of cardboard to make it look like a phone, and then sheets of paper, and just drew out and sketched out what the interface would look like. And then she was able to put this in front of people and get feedback before she ever wrote any code. So just a really helpful way to get that initial impression. At some point, you'll want to get higher fidelity. So there are a lot of tools to do that. Adobe XD is available to everyone on campus. InVision is pretty good. Sketch is pretty good, but Mac-based. Figma is our favorite. And we've done a couple of Figma workshops, and I think you might be learning more about that soon. But this is a great way to make more detailed prototypes and to allow for testing and interaction. So you can have things kind of click and go to other screens and get feedback that way. Does anyone have experience with these tools yet? Okay. It's good to tinker around with them. And Figma is Yes, am I saying this right? Yeah, it's free if you have an email.arizona.edu account. So academic, free to academic people. So testing and validating, I've mentioned this a few times, but putting your product, putting your idea out in the world and having people try to actually use it. This is a data visualization from a tree test that we did. And tree testing is testing your website navigation. So if you have a navigation structure, you have menus, you have drop downs, tree testing is a really helpful way to ask people, even before you have the website, where would you go to do this thing? And then you have them click through and see where they go to see if your navigation is intuitive. Usability testing is probably my favorite. So this is testing the interface to see how well it is or is not meeting the needs of the users. And so in this case, participants are asked to complete tasks. So it's not something where you just put the website in front and say, give us feedback. You have specific tasks in mind and you ask them to do those things. And then you observe what they do and how well it works or doesn't work. Really informative. This is an example we did in 2020. We were redesigning the library hours and some almost subtle changes, but huge difference in how people interpreted the content. So library hours are kind of confusing because we were open 24 hours, but we would close on Saturday nights, then we would open on Sunday mornings, but then we'd be open all night on Sunday. So like, how do you reflect that? So we used to say 24 hours, opens at 9 a.m. And that really, really confused people. So now we say opens at 9 a.m., stays open. Just that little change made a huge difference in the success rates of people understanding when they can come to the library, which is kind of a critical, important task for people. And we did a lot of testing. We changed the content, the navigation, the layouts, and also something called our audience switcher. So that was something that was tinkered around with a lot before we kind of landed on a final design that worked well. So once you're at a place that you're ready, you think you're ready to take it live, kind of letting go of perfection. This can be really hard. A lot of website sort of redesigns can probably go on for years because you keep wanting to make it better. But just knowing when it's ready, when it's better than what you have now, it might be worth just putting it out in the world. It's a website, you can always update it. So that's something I can advocate for. Just to not get too bogged down in some of the details. Observing, continuing to test, preparing that things might not work as well as you'd hoped. And then again, just that continuous cycle of iteration and improvement. Okay, so that's all the usability kind of principles and testing. The rest is just I'm going to talk about some resources on campus and other places to go. But any questions about anything so far? Yeah. Yes. So back in the day, we did the Tiny Cafe all the time, which was nice because most of our audience is students for a lot of the projects. So people passing by. But in your case, you could maybe do something like that too, depending who your audience is. Something we do a lot more now, we have a participant pool. So we actually send out emails to 200 or 300 students. You should all join, by the way, the participant pool. We give out gift cards and we just send out things. People can sign up for Zooms with us, or we send out a survey, an impression test, Kat sent out. So those are the types of things that we've done email recruitment, but we've also done in person. And depending what you're doing, you might explore a bit of both. Yeah, I mean, we've done some, like, we have the fancy version of Tiny Cafe, but we've also done, like, you have an iPad and a basket of snacks, and you just wander around the mall and find a couple people. So you might want to just keep it really simple and do it that way. Yeah. Does that help? Yeah. It can be harder, like when we did our special collections website, we had some much more specific types of things. Like special collections is a pretty specialized place. And so for that, we did more targeted recruitment where we emailed professors, where it was like through some personal relationships of, oh, I know this professor, they'd be willing to do it for no problem. So I think it varies depending on what you're doing, but yeah. Other questions? Who hasn't got a sticker yet? Someone's got a question, but doesn't have a sticker yet. Okay. There's more stickers, right? Yeah. Okay. So learning more about UX. Join UX at UA. Who's already in UX at UA Slack? 2 people. We should all join. It's worth it, right? There's like 400 of us in Slack now, I think. UX at UA is interesting too because it's students, faculty, and staff and industry. Like it really crosses the bounds of what you often get in Slack workspaces, I guess. So we do have an active Slack workspace. You can join just with your U of A email address. You don't have to get an invitation or anything. We do monthly meetups. Right now, they're all virtual. We have one coming up, I think October 28th on inclusive research design. So how to make sure you are recruiting a diverse audience, that you're representing marginalized voices as you're doing your research. It'll be really interesting. And we have a couple speakers from other states, like someone in Washington and someone in Michigan, I think. We do a weekly consulting hour. This is free. It's Wednesdays from 9 to 10. It's online through Zoom. So if you have a draft website, a prototype, you want to get feedback from UX experts, that's a great place to go. If you're interested in UX careers and just want to talk to some people about what that's like, great place to go. And we do also now have a mentorship program that just started this semester. So we have, gosh, like 6 or 7 people who have just volunteered to say, if students want to contact me and get advice. So that might be if you're interested in getting UX experience and you're wondering how, take a look at the list of mentors and see if there's someone who you'd like to talk to. Sometimes they might offer you an internship. You never know. I mentioned our participant pool. So this is a growing pool of people that just sign up. We send you an email maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks. So it's not super time intensive, and you get to learn what it's like to participate in a UX study of some sort and kind of be on that side of things. We do have gift cards. We're trying to give away all our gift cards by the end of October, or we have to return them to the bookstore. So there will be a really good chance of getting a gift card if you sign up and participate in something this month. So please do. I'll leave that up for a second because I see people typing. There's also, it's library stuff, but it's also stuff beyond. So we've had the Trellis who does like advising for campus, that whole system, they work with us and send things out. K-Map, which is the knowledge map for campus. There's some other campus partners, the think tank. So you could get some interesting stuff through that. And we really do make changes based on what we hear from students. So it's worth it. I mentioned the cookbook several times. It's just the uxcookbook.com. There's the personas in there, usability testing recipe, user interviews, impression testing, prototyping. I probably won't remember all of them. But yeah, there's lots of good stuff in there. Surveys, my least favorite, but surveys are fine. All right, thanks. Anything else? What do you want to talk about?
So I sent you the version of
Oh, okay,
sandbox site that we'll be working on.
great. Should we look at it now and talk about it?
If you have time.
Yeah, what time is it? I think so. Let's see. Yeah, I was planning to be here till 7, so. Sorry?
If you wanted to pause.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So, she said she sent me Slack? Oh, wait, what?
It's still on there, by the way. I forgot.
Oh, yeah, the screen's still on there. You want to look at our UX fail channel? Where did you say you put it?
Research.
This is in the UX UA Slack, though?
It's just, sorry, University of Arizona.
Oh, this one.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Got it. Okay. Here we are. Okay. You said, and then you sent the sandbox one. Got it. Okay. Okay. So what's been your process so far?
We don't have a process.
Okay.
We took over this club, it was kind of not active. So the website, the Wix, that we have
Yeah.
was what we inherited.
Okay.
From a few years ago.
Yeah.
And then what's there now is just one.
Okay.
So
Okay,
Would it be possible to share screen?
sure. So I guess maybe we don't even look at the old one.
Well, you
Or-
can look at the old one because that has a content,
I see, yeah, yeah.
you know, migrate to the new one.
And it looks like, so how would you describe your primary audience segments for the, like, who are the people? Who are your personas?
Personas.
Mhm.
Well, I think one persona is going to be, you know, someone who is probably freshman or sophomore, or thinking about computer science, or in the computer science program, wants to meet other people, and just need to run network,
Mhm.
and people socialize, resources.
Kind of talk about this in our last week's meeting. Like Anna said, we can like numbers, so they can be, they can be interested. Her members, of course, can,
Right.
if they forget about the meeting page, they
Yeah,
can
yeah.
just look at the website and see where it is. And then maybe, potential sponsors, or so people look at the weight clubs, which clubs to sponsor, so they can take a look at what we've been doing. And also members can use this website as a reference to what they have been involved during their time.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah.
things we can talk about.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, it might be worth, I'm thinking back to when we designed the UX UA website initially, and that was from scratch because we didn't have anything before. And we initially came up with the two personas, Neil the newcomer and Ray the regular. So maybe that's a similar kind of model of the newcomer versus the right. The newcomer needs to know all this information, but there's also the current people and what are their main things that they're on there for. And you could just do some persona generation as a group and be like, what's the goals? What are the main tasks that they want to do on the site? As a good starting, like just a foundational starting point. And and having the sponsor, I think too, one thing that's interesting, yeah, when even just noticing the navigation, become a sponsors, I kind of like the activeness of it because you're like, okay, I want to become a sponsor. Sponsor sounds like it's just a list of existing sponsors. So there's sort of two different things maybe. Submit resumes. I'm really big on active voice and verbs in navigation, especially if it's a task that they, like if they're actually submitting or they're RSVPing or they're contacting, like using those verbs can be helpful. Another thing that might be helpful too is if you have all of this content. I don't know if I mentioned card sorting. I don't think I did. I mentioned tree testing, but card sorting is another really helpful tool when you're getting started, where you literally take index cards and put every piece of, like every web page on a card. So maybe you have like the become a sponsor card, you have the past meeting links card, the meeting schedule card, and you put them all out. You probably got like 30 or 40 of these cards. And then either as a group or as in small teams, sorting them into categories to help figure out what your navigation could be. That's a really helpful way to visualize. And you can also then have the conversation of, oh, we're putting, all of this is for this particular audience. Maybe we need to have an audience-based section specifically for this group. Oh, we're putting all the event stuff together. Well, maybe we need an event section. Those types of things can really come out of that conversation. So I found card sorting. Usually what we do is we start with card sorting. Oh, and we call it open card sorting. Like there's no predetermined categories. You come up with the categories. Then you can move to closed card sorting where you have the categories in mind. So you're like, okay, we've thought about this and we want to have events, new member section and sponsorship or something. And then you put it in front of real audience members who haven't seen this yet, like new people, and get them to place the content in the categories to see if they place the content in the same categories that you came up with. And then you move to tree testing, which is like we have a robust architecture for the site. It's probably more useful on bigger sites. If yours is relatively simple, you might not need to do that, but that's been really helpful for some of the harder stuff that you have to like dive into the site a little bit more deeply. So that, I barely looked at the actual site yet, but just thinking of what those techniques might be that would be useful. Another thing you might find helpful is like a version of the impression test is the 5-second test. where once you have like a homepage, put it in front of someone for 5 seconds, then take it away and say, what do you remember? How did this make you feel? What do you think you can do here? And that's a really great way to see if your message gets across just on your homepage. That could be helpful too. And if there are like those main things of, who was it said earlier, like, who are you and what do you do or something? Can they tell that in the first 5 seconds? Like, is there some information? Is there like a little succinct, like, do you need a little slogan? Do you need something that will resonate with people? But a simple one, not like a mission statement necessarily, because people don't like to see mission statements on homepages. But is there something that like gets at what your main point is and who belongs here? Like, do people know that they belong here? That's something we think about with UX at UA a lot because it has the word UA in the title. So, but we're also open to the community. So we have right on our homepage that you don't have to be affiliated with the university. Everyone is welcome. So those types of things. Yeah.
So the other club websites, whether you like club websites, the general like UA, the next theme.
Yeah, yep.
Ours is different. Yeah. Is that something that you?
I think you should, because it's going to give you more credibility and people will recognize it. And I mean, our main library website is not good at that. We're moving towards it. And one thing that we did testing on, we changed a whole section of our site to the red, to like the very U of A looking. And people were worried, like our developers were actually really worried that it's going to be too jarring because you go from our blue site to this red site. But when they went to the red site, they're like, oh, this looks like a U of A site. Yeah, this is legit. So there's like an emotional, even if it's subconscious attachment, like it's recognizable. And if you go to brand.arizona.edu, all of the code is there, like all the typography, all the colors. Yeah, I would recommend using that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that sounds like something that we'll need to decide on.
Mhm.
With the UA, red, blue.
Yeah. Oh yeah, 'cause you have a lavender logo. Yeah. Yeah, that's hard. Yeah, that's interesting. Another thing you might try doing, another technique, I'm just gonna throw all these techniques out there, pick your poison or whatever, but competitive analysis where you look, we call it that, but you don't really have competitors per se, but like what are other similar organizations at the U of A doing? Because other people, they might be deciding between this group and a similar group, maybe there's like a tech something, and that can be really helpful for inspiration and to see like what not to do and what to do, what you want to model off of. Because if it's like none of the clubs on campus use the U of A branding, then I'd worry less about it. But if they all do and you don't, that would, you know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah. Someone will sometimes call them aspirational peers if there's like a good example. Like, who do you aspire to be like? You know, what do you want to model after? Yeah. I don't see a search box yet. There's one thing. Yeah. Good question. Let's see. No, there's not. Yeah. Oh, I wonder if you do. You can make a free Google custom search. I can do. Okay. Yeah.
Like form submission.
Okay. Yeah. What else? Be careful about color contrast. I don't know if you're familiar with color contrast checkers, but there's a bunch of free ones online. Those are great to just make sure that your background and foreground colors contrast enough so that they're readable. Another thing to pay attention to is there's your link color, and then there's your link color once you've clicked on it. What's it called? Like, not secondary link color. There's a name for it. Visited link. So if it's a visited link, it changes color. Sometimes people don't pay attention to that color, and then when it's on a background, it changes. Like the meeting club information here example is pretty hard to read. So yeah, I would pay attention to color contrast for sure.
Okay. Yeah, I think we did that to demonstrate the CSS on the.
Yeah, yeah.
So just, you know, so.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's really just a blank slate.
right.
that each can also-
Where you start, yeah. Well, even, yeah, identifying what those top tasks, your top audience, and then within your top audience is what are those top things, which will help you kind of come up with some ideas for a homepage. You can do a really fun, like collaborative sketch prototyping activity together where everyone gets 5 minutes to draw their ideal homepage, and then you compare and see like what are the elements that everyone's including, and let's draw on those. We've had some great experiences doing that as a group, yeah.
Okay. So our next meeting, we're going to be deciding these, UX UI elements.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Yeah. Another thing we've done with home pages, sometimes I don't know if it's officially called this, but the XO test, where you put it in front of people and have them circle the things that matter to them and cross out the things that don't. So if you are kind of like, if you end up having a lot of content and you're kind of worried about like, do we want all this stuff on the homepage, that can be a great way to just easily get feedback from people on what matters to them. I don't know if you have analytics on your old site. That can be really informative.
Knowing this, WX,
Yeah.
we'll come for it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're 10 minutes left. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah.
How does like the user experience and like the user interface, like person who works in those, is that the same person or is it two people work together?
The UX UI.
Yeah.
It depends. There's a whole like, I don't know, there's a big debate in industry about having UX UI as one person. But they still are one person in a lot of places. But a lot of times people will say, if you see a job that says UX UI, you're probably just doing UI. So just being aware of that and reading job descriptions carefully, depending on what you're trying to do, because if it's really UX, you're doing research too. And a lot of times if it's just UI, they just want you doing Figma prototypes and designing buttons and making interactive things, but not working with people so much and getting the feedback from the people using it. So that's kind of one of the big distinctions, that just reading the job description, you can tell sometimes based on that. So yeah. And there's a lot of new kind of emerging job titles, like UX developer has emerged as a job title just in the last year or two, that I'm seeing more, which means really more just the back end of things. Well, I guess, I mean, front end development, but not the research component so much. Content designer has also become a really big title, which is a lot about content writing, but layout and information architecture, those types of things. So it's an evolving field. Like even if some of you are freshmen or sophomores, by the time you graduate, it's gonna be different. So just knowing that, and like if you are looking at jobs, look at the qualifications in the description over the title, because sometimes the title of a UX UI designer in one company is very different from another. And even like your earlier question about, is it physical and digital channels and spaces, that also varies depending on who's hiring for it. So yeah. Interesting.
So our next meeting, if you're on the web, please look here, Figma, or if you can see your not to be website, if you know that our website, share with people the so we would like to meet, so if you have a design idea, it's very likely. Yeah. Easier. Does everyone know that, like, yes, Figma and
so many.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.